At 72 years old, Ethan Reynolds finds himself standing at the edge of a quiet lake in Oregon, the morning mist curling around the water's surface like a whispered memory. A retired marine engineer with a lifetime of experiences, from sailing international waters to raising three children, Ethan has now entered a season of reflection. No longer defined by deadlines or responsibilities, he wakes up each day not to a packed schedule, but to the gentle rhythm of birdsong and the soft warmth of his golden retriever, Buddy, curled at his feet. Ethan once believed success was measured by titles, possessions, and the opinions of others. But with time, that belief has faded like old photographs in an attic. He's come to understand something profound. Much of what seemed important in his 40s and 50s now feels strangely weightless. As he sips his coffee on the porch, watching the world move at its own pace, he smiles, not out of nostalgia, but out of peace. Because now his life isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about living freely, choosing joy, and embracing each day with intention. For most of his life, Ethan Reynolds lived with an invisible weight pressing on his shoulders, the constant need to be enough in the eyes of others. He built a successful career, bought the house with the white fence, attended every family gathering, and wore the mask of perfection with practiced ease. But deep down, he often wondered, who am I really doing this for? It wasn't until his 70th birthday party, surrounded by polite conversations, forced smiles, and people he hadn't truly connected with in years, that something inside him quietly snapped. As he watched guests compliment the cake and make small talk about stocks and surgeries, he felt a strange emptiness. He was grateful, of course, but he wasn't present. He wasn't fulfilled. Later that night, Ethan sat alone on his porch. The moonlight bathed the yard in silver, and Buddy rested his head on Ethan's knee. That's when it hit him. He had spent decades living for everyone but himself. The next morning, he made a quiet but life-altering decision. He began saying no. No to draining obligations. No to keeping things out of guilt. No to hiding parts of himself to please others. In that space, a new version of Ethan began to emerge. One guided by joy, peace, and personal truth. He donated half his possessions, unsubscribed from expectations, and rekindled a love for watercolor painting he hadn't touched since college. He reached out to his old friend Caleb, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely missed their long talks about philosophy and poetry. This turning point wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a gentle unraveling of everything he thought he had to be, and a tender return to who he truly was. 2 months after Ethan began reshaping his life, something happened that neither he nor anyone else saw coming. On a crisp autumn morning, he received a letter, yes, an actual handwritten letter, from a woman named Charlotte Whitman. The name was vaguely familiar. As he read the letter, his hands trembled slightly. Charlotte had been his first love, a gentle, artistic soul he had met in college over 5 decades ago. They had lost touch after graduation. Life swept them in different directions. She had stumbled across an old class photo and decided to write, unsure if he'd even respond. In the letter, she wrote candidly about her own life after 70, how she too had begun questioning what really mattered. She confessed that, while her years were full, she often wondered about the people who once stirred something real in her. Ethan, she wrote, had been one of those people. Ethan was stunned, not because of rekindled romance, but because the letter affirmed something he had just begun to believe, that it's never too late to reconnect with who you were or who you could be. He sat on the porch holding the letter, the wind brushing against his face like an old friend. He didn't know where this would lead, if anywhere, but it reminded him that the past, when revisited with new eyes, can offer unexpected gifts. A week later, he wrote back. Ethan never expected a simple letter to shift his entire outlook on life. Yet as he began exchanging letters with Charlotte, something inside him softened. Their conversations, once a distant memory from a different life, now became a lifeline to something deeply human, connection without expectation. They didn't dwell on the past. Instead, they talked about the present, about how age had stripped away the noise, the pretending, the constant striving. They discussed books, solitude, and the gentle beauty of watching leaves fall. Through her words, Ethan began seeing life not as something behind him, but something still unfolding. One morning after reading her latest letter, describing how she paints every sunrise from her small porch in Vermont, Ethan felt something shift. He looked around his own home, filled with things, routines, and habits that no longer served him, and thought, why am I still holding on to this version of life? He realized he didn't need to keep pretending to be the person he once was, the overachiever, the responsible one, the fixer. At 72, he finally gave himself permission to change. He rearranged his home, letting more light in. He spent more time in silence. He walked slowly, noticing the world instead of rushing through it. Most of all, he stopped needing everything to make sense. Some things, like joy, like healing, like late-in-life love, just are, and that was enough. A few weeks after his mindset began to shift, Ethan received an unexpected invitation. Charlotte had written again, but this time with something different in her words. A spark, a suggestion, a doorway. Would you like to visit Vermont? She asked. I know it's a long trip, but there's a local artist gathering next month at a lakeside cabin. Nothing formal, just good people, stories, and maybe a few brushes and paint. Ethan read the words over and over. The old version of himself, the one tied to routine and hesitation, might have politely declined. But this new version, the one who had started letting go of fear, guilt, and unnecessary obligations, felt something stir. He packed light. Just a few clothes, a sketchbook, and a curious heart. When he arrived in Vermont, the air smelled like pine and possibility. Charlotte greeted him with that same gentle smile he remembered, now lined with wisdom and kindness. They didn't talk about lost years. They talked about now. They painted together in silence. They laughed at nothing in particular. They sat by the fire and shared memories, not as regrets, but as treasures. This wasn't about rekindling romance. It was about discovering a kind of companionship that didn't need to be defined, just appreciated. Ethan realized this was the kind of opportunity age had made possible, to live from the heart, to say yes to beauty, and to start again, without apology. As the days in Vermont passed, Ethan found himself waking up differently, not just earlier, but lighter. The weight he had carried for so many years, the pressure to be someone, to prove something, was no longer there. He and Charlotte painted in the mornings, sat by the lake in the afternoons, and cooked simple meals in the evenings. It was a rhythm that didn't demand anything of him, and in that stillness, Ethan began to grow in ways he hadn't thought possible at his age. He started sketching again, not to impress, but to feel. His brush strokes weren't perfect, but they were honest. In those quiet moments, he rediscovered something he thought he had lost long ago, a deep connection to himself. Charlotte noticed the change. You're softer now, she said one night, more open. Ethan smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. He was no longer the man who needed to be in control, to always have the answers. He wrote letters to his children, not about expectations or advice, but about love and presence. He even reached out to an old friend he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, just to say thank you. Ethan wasn't becoming someone new. He was returning to someone he had always been, beneath the layers. And in doing so, he realized, growth doesn't stop with age. Sometimes it only begins when we let go. On his final morning in Vermont, Ethan stood at the edge of the lake, the water still as glass. He held a finished painting in his hands, one he and Charlotte had created together. It wasn't perfect. The lines were uneven, the colors improvised. But to Ethan, it was beautiful. It was real. He looked out across the water, not with regret, but with deep, quiet gratitude. Life hadn't turned out exactly as he once imagined, but somehow it had brought him here, to peace, to freedom, to himself. There was no dramatic ending, no tearful goodbye, just a warm hug, a promise to write, and the gentle knowing that the most meaningful connections in life often come back to us when we're finally ready to receive them. As he drove away from the cabin, the road winding through golden trees, Ethan smiled. He felt full, not of things or achievements, but of presence. He understood now that life after 70 wasn't a closing chapter. It was an invitation to live more honestly, to love more gently, to let go and trust that what's meant for you will find you. And most of all, to begin again, no matter your age. Ethan's journey teaches us a powerful truth. It's never too late to reclaim your life. After decades of living for others, following routines and chasing ideals, he finally chose to live for himself, authentically and intentionally. The lesson isn't about abandoning responsibilities or forgetting the past. It's about honoring the present and recognizing that our worth doesn't diminish with age. Letting go of outdated expectations, toxic relationships, and societal pressure opens the door to a life rooted in simplicity, joy, and peace. Whether you're 30 or 70, it's okay to change, to soften, to begin again. Aging isn't the end of growth. It's often the beginning of your most meaningful chapter. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You've earned it. Start by asking, what no longer serves me? Maybe it's clutter in your home, draining social ties, or outdated routines. Give yourself permission to say no without guilt and yes to what brings light to your life. Try something new. Paint, write, walk a different path, or reconnect with an old friend. Reflect on what you've always wanted to do, but postponed. Age is not a barrier. It's a beautiful lens that sharpens what truly matters. This week, schedule just one moment that's entirely for you, not out of obligation, just for joy. That's how it starts. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and share with your friends. Your support keeps these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And if today's story touched your heart, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, stay well, and see you in the next story.